I'll do it if you'd like.
Terrific, thanks.
Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for all the many blessings that thou hast given us. We are thankful that we are able to meet today, and that we may, please bless us, that we may have the Spirit to be with us, that we may understand, that we may be able to remember and retain what we're learning. And please help us to be able to learn the material well. And these things we ask thee in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. I teach for a secular college full-time. That's my job. I teach at Eastern Arizona College, if any of you know it. We call it BYU South Campus, even though it's actually part of the state system. We have about 2/3 of our student population's LDS, and so sometimes it feels like we're at one of the Y campuses. But it's still not the same as this. We don't start our classes with a prayer. We don't discuss the spiritual aspects of the things we're learning there. And then I also teach part-time for Arizona State University, which is even secular than it's pretty secular. And so this is a wonderful difference, actually, to invoke the Spirit when we do this work. The thing about accounting is, I remember when I first started teaching it for BYU Idaho, and they wanted us to do, bring something spiritual into it, and I felt like we really had to twist and bend to do that. It was more like adding a spiritual thought instead of integrating it. But the more I have worked with it over the years, the more I realize there are eternal principles in all of these things. And there's this little moment, and you'll see it when we get a few chapters in here, when your balance sheet, everything just balances right, and there's this strange little moment of peace almost that happens when you do it. And I really think when we find that balance, we're tapping into something broader and something more eternal. The Lord's universe is one of order, and you can find that in various aspects of life, and even in accounting. So be watching for those little things. It always surprises me when I'm doing something that I feel is completely secular and have this little moment where the Spirit testifies and says, oh no, that's it. Do you see how all things are spiritual? Those are the coolest moments. So anyway, so the format of this meeting typically is for me to go over a few general announcements, and then for me to do what I would call a baby lecture, a mini lecture, like just 5 to 10 minutes of sort of the kind of main things you would expect to see or have issues with in this chapter. And then to turn the time over for questions. And those questions can be like clarifying questions, things that you just, as you were doing the work that came up, or they could actually be like, can you work out this problem for me or for the whole group? What I found is usually if one person has questions, then other people have the same question. So don't be afraid to ask, and we'll try to get through it. I also want you to know that in addition to this meeting, there's a couple of TAs, and I posted this in the announcement, who will do weekly study group type meetings. I've heard really positive feedback from last semester. We just had Emily doing it, and I've heard really positive feedback. So I don't know the other TA, but I'm sure they're great too. And recognize that I'm remotely, so I'm not at the BYU Idaho campus. I'm in Arizona, actually. So I don't know these TAs personally at all. They're there on campus. Anyway, so before I kind of get into a couple of announcements and show you a couple of tools that are available, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask up front? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you and just show you a couple things that I think sometimes people miss. I should have had that open already. So here I am in the home page of the course. So my main means of communicating with the whole group is going to be through the announcements. So if you're not looking at the announcements here, you're probably missing communications from me. They should be at the top of the home page, and please read those, because I try not to put dumb, like useless stuff there. I try to make it meaningful. If you miss an announcement, it gets pushed off the home screen. You can always just click on the announcements page here and it will bring them up. So one thing I wanted to show you is I send out these weekly sort of like intro for the week announcements. And a lot of times people will read this part up here, which tells you all the stuff that's due this week, but they'll miss the stuff down here. And there's some pretty important stuff a lot of times down here. The first is this additional study content page. This is something I've put together over years and years of teaching this class. And it's separate from the textbook, what the textbook provider provides. So if you click on it, it just takes you to a Google Docs page, but it has some stuff I've put together for each chapter, and including like a little lecture video of me lecturing on these topics. This is actually an older recording, so this isn't something I did this semester. It's something I did several semesters ago, but some people find it helpful. Again, what I'm trying to do is give you a bunch of tools to be successful. Some people will watch that and be like, that's really good, it helps me. And other people will say, 23 minutes, I ain't got time for that, or whatever, and they won't do it. I know my kids, if a video is more than about 4.5 minutes, they're like, gross, I can't do that. So, you have to do you and what works for you. A lot of people tell me these self-tests are really helpful to them. These come from the textbook publisher, and they're really similar to the types of questions you'll see on the exams. So a lot of people like those, and so they might be worth checking out. And it's like a little quiz, and you can take them multiple times, and actually it gives you different questions because it pulls, actually, no, I don't think it does. I think these are the same questions each time. And then there's an additional self-test. There's also me occasionally working out a B version of some of the homework problems. So these are all and it's just me sort of talking through, working out the problem. And then I always have a little quick review of the whole chapter. So these are tools for you. Try them out. If they're valuable to you, use them. If they're not valuable to you, then, again, you have to be judicious with your time. This course can really be a time sink, especially as we get to some of the chapters that people find tougher than others. Anyway, so that's there. And the way you find it is by going to the announcements. And each week down in other news, there's a link to that additional study content. Usually this is where I announce the weekly class meeting. My intent is to always hold it at this time each week. But I know I referee high school soccer, and I know that I have a couple matches on Thursday nights coming later in the semester. So I may have to adjust every once in a while and say, hey, I can't do it on Thursday night tonight. We're gonna have to move it to another night. So that's where I'll announce that. And then this announcement I had this week is about the exams, not trying to scare everybody, but I get a lot of feedback from students every semester. They feel the exams are tough. And so the Wiley Companion site, which you can actually, I'll show you where to find it in the course. A lot of people find value in some of those tools too. So if you go to the modules in the course, and then you go to the Read, Study, Practice, which is your textbook as well. So there's a little drop down here for each chapter. And then for each chapter, they have tons of resources that are put out by the publisher. This is your textbook, in essence, these chapters, sections. I'm being told by people that this downloadable e-textbook link doesn't work. We emailed Wiley and said, what the heck? And they say, oh, well, it doesn't work with this new setup. So just so you know, this whole thing where they've changed to this integrated textbook and people don't order it separately is brand new to the instructors this semester too. They didn't warn us about it. And I know it's giving people a lot of frustration, and I'm sorry. But I don't have any sort of administrator back-end privilege to do anything about it. So consider these chapter reading content here as your text that's included with that integrated textbook. A lot of people like this Orion personalized practice. What it does is it gives you kind of like some practice problems. You work through them, and then it grades them and says you're good at these skills, but you still need work on these skills, and it develops another set. So it's kind of like this learning system that I've had many students say really helps them prepare. So that's.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't hear the question. But anyway, so that's the Wiley Plus Read Study Practice. And like I said, there's almost so many tools that it's too much. So again, you kind of have to, in these first few weeks, that's part of why they put in that required self-study little assignment where it's just like I think they're trying to show you the tools available. And then you can go more in depth into the ones that you think are meaningful or helpful to you. Okay, so that's all I have from an announcement standpoint. Any questions or comments on that?
I got a question.
Okay.
So this Orion stuff and what was the other thing? The self-test or the additional test or whatever? So those things help for the quizzes and the tests to come up, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So they're not for a grade. They won't improve your grade just by doing them, but they should improve your ability to do well on the exam.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. All right. So let me just share with you, I just stole a couple. So there's this full humongous slideshow down here. It's called, it's in here, it's called PowerPoint Review, and it's like 67 slides or something. And you're always free to go back and like look through that whole thing if you think it would be helpful to you. But I pulled out like just a couple slides that I think review the things that you really need to know for this chapter. So I'm gonna go over a couple things here. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So this first chapter introduces the primary financial statements. And what a financial statement is it's this effort to sort of put financial information into a simplified and consistent format so that even people who are non-financial people can read them. And so this first chapter, they're just trying to, I guess, familiarize you with these basic financial statements that you'll be seeing and learning how to, all the sort of underlying accounting that goes on behind creating them in the next several chapters. So the first one's the income statement, and it just summarizes all the revenues and the expenses of a business in a given period of time. So you'll see this one is for the month ended October 31st. When it says for the month ended, that means from October 1st to October 31st. It has the revenue, has all the expenses, and then they're listed as, and then added up as total expenses. Revenue minus expenses gives you net income. That's the income statement. If you were to have more expenses than you have revenue, then you'd have what's called a net loss for the period. So just remember, income statement summarizes revenues minus expenses for a given period of time. Let's see.
So quick question about that.
Yeah.
So how do you know when it's for, like here it says for the month ended in October 31st?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know if it's for the end of the year or for the end of the month?
Right, it would actually say for the year ended, and it would give you a date, or for the quarter ended. So most typically in this class, and in most businesses, they do monthly statements. Smaller businesses sometimes only do quarterly statements. And then if you're like going on Yahoo Finance, or if you're trying to look at like for investing purposes, their statements are almost always annual statements. So, but it will say, there'll be a clue up here in the title of it, month, year.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah. All right. So the income statement leads into or flows into what's called the retained earnings statement, or sometimes you'll see it called the statement of retained earnings. And the statement of retained earnings, first of all, you need to know what retained earnings are. So retained earnings are earnings or profit, net income that a business earns during a period and then doesn't pay out to the owners in the form of dividends.
For labor or services.
Let's see. Somebody had a British guy talking, which was, or maybe he was Australian. I didn't hear enough. Maybe he was really sneaky and was a South African. I don't know. Every once in a while I hear those and I'm like, wait, was that British or Australian? No, it was South African. Anyway, so a couple terms that you should know is, so like I said, retained earnings. So first of all, let me start with net income. Net income is the revenue minus expenses. Sometimes you'll hear it called the net profit. That's the money that a business makes during a given period. And then retained earnings is the money that the business makes and then retains or holds in the business rather than paying it out. There's really only two ways you pay money out of a business. One is through expenses over here, and the other is through dividends, which is taking a share of the profits and paying it to the shareholders who are the owners of the business. So our statement of retained earnings is going to have the retained earnings that we had at the beginning of the period. So for this new business, they had 0 at the beginning. You add in the net income, subtract out any dividends paid to the owners, and you're left with the retained earnings at the end of the period. When we move into November, it'll start with 2360. We'll add any net income for that month, subtract out any dividends for that month, and then we'll have a new retained earnings. So that's the statement of retained earnings. The statement of retained earnings always is the same time period as covered by the income statement. And like I said, dividend is the amount that the business pays out to the owners, okay? If you think about it, so I own a small business, and it's a little storage business, and each month we make money, and sometimes I decide some of that money should come to me because I worked hard in running my business, and so I take some of that money out. That's a dividend. Other months I think, you know what, I need to leave some money in this business so I can save up to build that new gate system I've been wanting. And so instead of taking money out of the business, I leave it in the business. And that money that the business earns that I don't take out as the owner, that's the retained earnings.
Brother Fox, how are the dividends determined?
So for purposes of the class, they'll tell you this is the amount of the dividend. For purposes of a small business like mine, as the business owner, I can just decide that. I can just decide how much dividends, because in a big corporation, what happens is the corporate board votes on it. They say we can issue this much of a dividend this year. Then they divide that out by the number of shareholders and each share, or number of shares outstanding, and then each share gets so much dividend.
Okay.
So in a big corporation, it's the corporate board just sort of, they get a briefing from the chief financial officer who says this is the amount we think we can afford to pay, and then they vote on it.
Thank you.
But in this class, it'll tell you they paid a dividend of this much. So that'll make it easier. So then there's the balance sheet. So the balance sheet is a summary so the income statement measured the amount of revenue minus the amount of expenses during a given period of time. The balance sheet gives you the balances of your assets, your liability, and your equity accounts at a given moment in time. So rather than measuring across a period, the balance sheet gives you the balances as of a certain time. So this balance sheet these are the balances of each of these accounts as of October 31st, 2017. It's split up into assets, liabilities, and stockholder equity. The easiest way to remember this is assets equal things that you own, so that the business owns. This includes cash. Accounts receivable means money owed to you by customers. Supplies, etc., equipment, these are all the things the business owns. Liabilities are things that the business owes. So debts, notes payable means money that they've borrowed, usually from a bank, but it could be from individuals or someone else. Accounts payable is money owed to them by their money that they owe to their suppliers. This tricky one, you'll see it later and it'll confuse you. Unearned service revenue. That's a liability that arises when your customer pays you in advance. And now you have the money, but you owe them the services that you agreed to provide to them. So anyway, so remember, assets equal own, liabilities equal owe, and then stockholders' equity is the difference between the two. That's a little bit confusing. It means, so we know that the fundamental accounting equation, you probably learned this already in your studies, is that assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity. And that's that's summarized right here on the balance sheet. We could reframe that same statement as assets minus liabilities equals stockholder equity. In other words, what the business owns minus the debts it owes is the amount of the business that's left over that belongs to the actual owners of the business. Think of if you have building equity in a home. or in a car or in some other asset. You buy a car, and let's say it's worth $30,000, and you're able to pay $6,000 down on that. So immediately you have an asset worth $30,000, and you had to borrow $24,000, and the equity in it is $6,000, or the amount of it you actually own. So a good way to think of stockholders' equity is just the amount of the company's assets that actually belong to the owners, to the stockholders. So it's the assets minus the liabilities. We get that equity from one of two ways. Like my example with the car, I got that by making a down payment, or in other words, I contributed that capital, that money into the business. So one way that you get stockholders' equity is through investment from the owners. And we list that as common stock. That's the amount of money the owners have paid in. The other way that we build equity in a business is that the business earns money and doesn't pay it out as dividends, our retained earnings. So our retained earnings that we figured out in our statement of retained earnings flows into the balance sheet right here. All right, I've just dumped a whole ton of information on you. Any questions come to mind or comments?
My question is the way that it's all set up, like when we're trying to create one of these, is there a reason that there's like one that's kind of shifted over towards like for the assets, and then for the liabilities and equity, it's kind of shifted over to like another side, and then the totals are all on the same column as the assets?
So so the reason that they show it this way is because the assets are all added up in a single group here. And you'll notice that the total assets will equal the total liabilities and stockholder equity. So they're just doing it so they can show a subtotal for total liabilities, a subtotal for total stockholder equity, and then show you that those two added up will equal the total assets. So that's the only reason they're showing it that way on here.
Okay, thank you.
For subtotaling. One last financial statement that you'll see, but we won't actually get super in depth with. That's the balance sheet, is the statement of cash flows. And it's enough to know that the statement of cash flows just summarizes the amount of cash that goes in and out of the business in a given period. The reason we have to do this is sometimes we'll record revenues even though we haven't gotten paid yet. So if we do the work for somebody, we go ahead and record that revenue, but maybe we bill them and they're not going to pay us till next month. And then sometimes we have expenses that we may have incurred, but we're not going to pay them until a future date. And so because of that, our revenue minus expense, our net income, will not always match up with the amount of cash that moved in a given period. And if a business runs out of cash, they are really unable to do business, right? Employees don't like to show up if you're not going to pay them. So the statement of cash flows helps us summarize how much cash we're bringing in through operating, through investing, by buying large assets such as land or buildings, or selling those large assets, and through financing, through borrowing and issuance of stock. I don't think we need to go any deeper into the statement of cash flows now. We will later, near the end of the course, we'll spend a whole chapter on it. Anyway, so that's kind of all I have for my mini lecture. It was actually a little less mini than usual. It took us about 12 minutes to get through that. But there's a lot of kind of new stuff in this chapter. So this is the stage at which I kind of turn things over and see if anybody has any questions, either from the homework or from the reading, things that maybe I could address.
I have a question that came from the quiz that I took earlier today. It talked about the steps of solving an ethical dilemma. And I was just wondering if you could go through those steps real quick.
So, yeah.
I guess it's a quiz question, but.
That's okay. So just so you know, so the quizzes are not meant to be like summative assessments. And what I mean by that is it's okay to use your book on quizzes. It's okay to use notes on quizzes. They're meant to be more like a learning check. It's the exams where you can't use any of those notes. So don't worry about asking about quiz questions. I don't mind trying to answer them. Do recognize though that that like if you say post a quiz question in the discussion, that you can't just put the question number, because there's like the quizzes pull from a big pool of questions, and so your question number 8 won't be the same as somebody else's question number 8. You actually have to like, and I don't, again, they're not secret, so it's okay if somebody has a question about one, to post it in that discussion, because a lot of times other people come across that same question, and so answering it's helpful. So this support forum discussion, I think, as a matter of fact, somebody posted, yeah, like right here, someone posted a quiz question in there, and I didn't mind working it out and explaining it for the whole group. Anyway, so to your question specifically, honestly, I don't know without looking at the book, like what what, you know. So the thing with like how you deal with ethical dilemmas is like in real life, each place has a little bit of their own set of I mean, not a set of ethics, I hope, but they have their own process for dealing with ethical dilemmas. And so when it asks something like that, to me, that's just like a straight out of the textbook answer, where I have to go look at that section and be like, what does the book want from me here? In fact, if I had my way, I hate those kinds of questions, because instead of it actually being about like learning, it's more about like, can you regurgitate this section of the textbook? But if you want, we can pull that up, and let's see, and we can try to find that. Let's see. So honestly, I would just come to read, study, practice, and then I would, let's see, probably have to just come in here and find the info. So I'm not going to know off the top of my head. Business types, 4 financial statements. External users, ethics. So the question right here, so effective financial reports to sensitize you to ethical situations. We address ethics in a number of ways. Here's this little numbered list. Solving an ethical dilemma. What was the question? Was it do you remember?
Like something like, which of the following answers doesn't belong to the steps?
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, honestly, for those types of questions, I'd have to come here and be like, recognizing an ethical, here's their steps, solving an ethical dilemma, and then I would just have to do it. And what's hard is, you know, I try to convince them to not put these kinds of questions on the exam, because, you know, I think you have enough to do to memorize all of the sort of functions of accounting. And then there's these sort of what I would call side informational learning as well, which is not bad learning, but I don't know that you have to commit it to memory. In real life, you know, we don't memorize much of this. You know, you don't do a lot of accounting when you don't have reference stuff available to you. So, but I'm not the one who, I don't design the exam either. So I will tell you, as we get close to the exam, that there's an exam study guide checklist, and it's really great. Whoever made it, again, it wasn't made by me. It looks like they just took the exam and like went down the questions and then said, study this concept based on what was in each question. So, so that will help as we get close to the, and it's not, we're not far away. So, I mean, the first exam you'll see is actually after week 3. That's the first exam, and it's due October 6th. So right here, where it says review exam 1, that's where you'll find that little study guide. It's called the checklist. I don't know why they call it the checklist, but if you click on that link, it'll open up this PDF, and that's the document I'm talking about. I'll probably also share it in the announcements that week too, just to make it easier to find. But what it does is it has each exam, and then it has like these little bullet points. And like I said, whoever made those bullet points just went through the exam. And so it says, know about the 3 main forms of business ownership. So you know, they read a question about business ownership and said, okay, that's there. So I find that helpful as a resource. when you get there. So any other question I can sort of answer like I did Jay's. I showed you where you can find the answer. I guess that's something. But.
That's good. That's good. I like that.
I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
I'm actually working on week 3 right now and looking at the ratios and all that kind of stuff. For the exams, are we allowed like a note card that we can put formulas on, or do we have to memorize all those formulas?
So the answer is they do not allow the use of notes for the exams. And I say they, you notice that's me trying to like push any responsibility off of myself. So the way BYUI structures their classes is they build them and then we facilitate them. That being said, I'm not trying to like say they're horrible people for doing it that way. That's the policy of the accounting department, is no notes on the exams. They want this to be from your brain only.
That's what I figured, but I thought I'd ask anyway.
Yeah, sorry. Any other questions? And also, don't feel like you have to come up with questions. If you're good, then that's okay for us to end the meeting. We don't have to like just hang out here. And sometimes people feel like they have to fill an hour or something, and that's not, we don't have to do that.
I have a question on the first set of homework problems.
Okay, let me get there. But yeah, go ahead.
It was it was a problem where you had to fill in the blanks. There were numbers missing, and for some reason I cannot figure that out.
Okay.
I was able to do it on the second set of homework problems, but the first one I couldn't figure it out. I only have one guess left.
I know, you get down to that last check and you're like, oh man, there's like a new meaning of fear or something. All right, well, let me pull it up. And here's the other thing. When it comes to the homework, I don't consider working with other people cheating, okay? Like in face-to-face classes, I tell students, man, if you team up, you get 6 checks instead of 3, right? Like now it's one thing if one person does all the work and the other person just copies it. That's cheating. It's another thing if you work together with somebody and you learn together. That's part of the BYUI learning model, right? Is that we teach one another. So if you find like a study group or a study buddy that you can work things together with, I think that's wonderful. I just throw that out there. I think that's where real learning often happens. So you don't remember which question it was, do you, Anne-Marie?
Let me quickly check. Sorry.
That's all right.
I probably should have thought to have that ready.
I still think you're a good person.
Thanks.
I mean, I don't really know you, but highly likely that you're a good person. How about that?
Sounds good. Sorry, my computer's running slow. Maybe somebody else has another question while I look it up.
Okay, right. And I have my screen here. Let me share my screen again. So let's see. I can click through these and maybe you can see which one.
Okay.
Too. Is it this one?
I think it was the last one.
This one? Incomplete financial statements?
Maybe not.
The last brief exercise?
No.
Well, we're getting there. There's only a couple more we can do. So.
Maybe it was the last one. I think it was under liabilities and stockholders' equity. There was a missing number and I could not get that missing number.
Okay. Yeah, and so when I bring it up on my end, it shows all the, and it's not the same answers as yours, right? What's interesting about this is it does use a little algorithm to come up with different numbers for everybody, which is cool. Like if you retry it, you get different numbers, and so you're still learning. You're not just copying it down. Anyway, so the key to these is like understanding, I guess, how each of these things work, and so let's see. It gives us. I wish it would show me without the answers and I would just work through it for you guys. Let me see, there's probably a way for me to make it do that, to show it without the answers. I'm just on the instructor site. So what this is all about is it's all about us understanding the sort of interrelationship between all of these pages. So let me see.
I think I couldn't figure out how to add or subtract to get the, I guess it's A.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it several different ways. I know it's like elementary math, but I couldn't figure it out.
Right. So if you remember the things I just showed you, that they kind of have to flow in a certain order for you to be able to figure them out. And so you start with the income statement, and then you figure out the net income. And once you figured out the net income, then you can figure out the statement of retained earnings. And then once you figure out the statement of retained earnings, you can figure out the balance sheet. The way they set this up is the only one of these that only has one variable or one piece of information you don't know was the statement of retained earnings. So you had to start there to make it work. And so you had to say, okay, I know that the statement of retained earnings is beginning retained earnings plus blank minus 4,000 equals 32,000. So you use that to solve for the net income. Then once you know the net income, you plug that in here, and then you say, I know revenue minus the expenses, and this has two expenses, cost of goods sold and wage expense equals net income. So once you have this one, you can solve for the cost of goods sold. And then you can also, once you know your retained earnings, you can plug that in here. And then to solve for common stock, you just say assets equal the liabilities plus equity. So I know this is 67. I know this will have to be 67. So once I know retained earnings from here, then I can solve for common stock. Does that make sense, or am I just talking in a circle? It's okay to say I'm talking in a circle, if that's what it is.
I'm still a little confused.
All right, let me see if I can pull it up where I can actually work it out for you guys, and I think that will help a lot more. Give me just a second.
If I can get onto it, I'll show you my screen.
Okay. I'm gonna see if I can go in at the student view of it too. Let's see.
Okay, I got it.
All right, let me see. Let me make sure I can allow you to share your screen. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now. All right. So we know that total assets, 69,100 equals total stockholder equity of 69,100, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the liabilities plus the stockholders' equity, which is common stock and retained earnings, has to add up to this total liabilities and stockholder equity. So to figure that out, I would just take the total, subtract retained earnings, which I know of 34,100, subtract the liabilities of 5,200, and that would give me the amount that should be common stock.
Oh, got it. I think I was adding it.
Right.
Instead of subtracting.
So those three items, the liabilities, the common stock, and retained earnings, should add up to 69,100.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm glad it helped. That was a more direct answer than the one I gave earlier to Jay. So
No
Sorry,
worries.
Jay. All right. Any other questions or like things from the homework we could look at?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're writing down the accounts, like the wage expense, rent expense, advertising expense, they have to be in a certain order, correct?
So in real life or in Wiley Plus. So typically they don't have to be in a specific order unless the problem specifies the expenses need to be in a specific order. Sometimes, every once in a while, they'll do a weird thing. They'll be like, put the expenses in alphabetical order. But nobody does that in real life. So I don't know why they're doing that unless it's just the way their system is built. It can't see multiple correct options. So that was a really long answer that I don't know if really answered your question. But unless it tells you, there's not usually a specified order for the expenses.
Okay.
And just so you guys know, Jana is my wife's cousin, but she won't get any special treatment in this class, okay? Anyway.
Yeah, I didn't even have to say the prayer, so it's good.
Right, all right. It's a small world. We have students in this class from all over the world, and then my wife's cousin pops up in the class. I think that's kind of cool. Anyway, any other questions?
I actually have a question on the second part of the homework.
Okay.
Would it be easier if I just shared my screen with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's reflecting your glasses. We could kind of see it, but it was like two tiny little screens.
Oh, let's see. Here it is. So I was just confused about these two, how to get those from the numbers that we have.
Sure. So let me take a look at it here and see what I can figure out. So those numbers there will be your answers, right? And then I think if you hover over them or click on them, it will show you the correct answer. That's another thing people don't always realize it does for you. Like, click on it right there.
Right here?
Yeah. Oh, maybe.
I haven't used all my.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, then it's not going to give you the correct answer.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. Total assets, total liabilities, total stockholders equity, end of year, total assets, liabilities, total stockholders equity, changes during the year in retained earnings, dividends, expenses. All right. So the changes in total stockholders equity, okay, let's see. So it's going to tell us up here, summary of the data, determine the missing amounts, assume changes in stockholder equity are all due to changes in retained earnings. Okay, so what you have to understand is that stockholders equity is only made up of two things. It's made up of common stock and retained earnings. And this is telling us to assume all of the changes are due to changes in retained earnings. Retained earnings are only made up of our net income minus the dividends. So what we have to do is, first of all, figure out the difference in the stockholders' equity of the two periods. So for the Walco Corporation, I would take the $52,300 minus the $45,000, and I would come up with $7,300. So that's the change in the stockholders' equity from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Okay, so the other thing, so this would be a lot easier if I could show my screen now. That's the problem with all the screen sharing. So I have $7,300 change by subtracting the equity end of the year from the beginning of the year. So then I have to figure out, well, how much of that change is due to the net income. So I have revenues of $210,000 minus expenses of $164,000. So the business had a $46,000 net income for the year. So now I know that even though they had $46,000 in net income for the year, their total stockholders' equity only went up by $7,300. So to figure out how much of a dividend they paid, I would take the $46,000 in net income, which is the amount it would have gone up if they didn't pay any dividends, minus the 7,300, which is the amount it did go up. And that's going to tell me how much they paid in dividends. So 46,000 minus 7,300. They paid dividends of 38,700 for the year.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense than what I was doing. So
Okay.
thank you.
And then for the second one, Gunther Enterprises, we have to kind of do that same process, but in reverse, so to speak. So now we know the amount of dividends, but we don't know the amount of revenues. And so we have to solve it the same way.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Or is that enough abuse for one night? 48 minutes of pain or something like that. I don't know. Like we're here to get like I don't know, like I'm your personal trainer. We're gonna get you like your brain so ripped from learning accounting stuff, or I don't know, something like that. Anyway, okay. Well, I think that's a good place. Oh wait, there's something in the chat. Let me make sure I respond. Someone said there are some great walkthrough videos that go through a similar problem. It's called Video Similar Exercise. So yeah, those are helpful too. And those are usually, are they just at the bottom of the problems? I'm not looking at it now. Sometimes it has those. Yeah, Video Similar Exercise at the bottom right there. Oh, I'm not sharing. So when you're looking at the problem down at the bottom, there'll be this Video Similar Exercise, and that will take you like a little walkthrough through a similar problem, which again can be very helpful, especially when you're stuck and pulling your hair out. Anyway, okay, well, I'm really grateful.
I've got one question.
Oh, yeah.
On the article that we're supposed to be reviewing, is there any specific thing we're supposed to be looking at, or length for the articles, or it was just anything that we're just generally interested in learning about?
Good question. So he's asking about the, where's it at? The paper article.
Yeah.
So the only thing that you need to be cognizant of that people don't put in here, because a lot of times they just read this, but you have to refer to the paper 1 introduction because it's going to give you more details, is right here that, let's see, actually it looks like they changed it. It used to be they wanted it to be an article from the, oh here, it's still here. The article you select is from the most recent 10 years. So there's no minimum length, but it has to be a journal article. Okay, so it can't be from a newspaper. It has, what they're trying to do is get you used to looking in occupational, or we don't really do scientific journals, but New Accountant or a marketing journal, or whatever it is you're interested in. Some people are interested in healthcare, so they'll find a healthcare journal. So the only real criteria is it has to be, let's see, a professional journal, and the article has to be from the most recent 10 years, so from 2010 or later. And if it's not, if you do something from 2006, I'll reply and say, hey, that article is more than 10 years old. But that's it. And for this first little thing, a lot of people think they have to write something. All you're doing for the first little assignment is you're submitting what's it called? Like a little bibliography entry for the article you're going to do. And the intent of that is so that you don't go through writing the whole paper and then I come back and say, oh, that's not from a professional journal, or, oh no, that's too old. So this first week, you don't have to write a paper. You're just saying, this is the article I intend to do. And the only feedback you're going to get is like, yep, looks good. That'll be a great one. Or it's too old, or that's not a professional journal. That's a periodical, something like that. When you go to the eJournal Finder, you can limit your search to just journals, and that will help you.
Professional journals, okay. I don't know if the article I got was a professional journal or not, or if it was just a professional magazine thing. I don't know.
Well, and if you're wondering, like, you know, if you're wondering, you're not sure, you can hit me with an email too or something, and I'll reply and say, yeah, that looks fine. But even like if you submit it for the article and I reply back, hey, this doesn't fit the criteria, I still let you turn it in and get full. You're not going to lose points. Like, this isn't meant to be like a punitive thing. It's meant to make sure you're doing what's required by the assignment.
Thank you.
Okay. I also want to let you know, as we get into that paper more, this is not an English class. I am not. It's one of those assignments in my book that if you just do a decent job, find an article, read it, and share your summary of the article and something you gained from it, which is I think what it asks you to do, why you selected it, an overview and the main things you learned, then that's like you get full credit. Okay, so I'm not there going like, well, your grammar is, you know, no, if your grammar is so atrocious that I can't read your paper or follow it, then that'll be feedback, of course. But most people can write put together a 1 to 2 page paper and just follow the rules, and you get full credit. So don't sweat this thing like it's some kind of crazy big, you know, term paper you have to write. It shouldn't be that onerous on you. That's not the intent. Hey, one last thing before we finish. For whatever reason, when you guys send me emails through through Canvas, it just tells me it's from financial accounting. It doesn't tell me which section. So a lot of times people will say, hey, I'm having problems with this problem. And then I have to go look through both sections, find them. If you would just include what section you're either in section 14 or 24, that will help me. If you don't, it's not like I'm going to like reject your message. It's just, it'll just be a help to me if you include that information. If you don't know, don't worry about it too much. All right, any volunteers for a closing prayer?
I'll do it.
Oh, either way.
Yeah, either way.
All right, go ahead, John. Thank you.
Okay. Our Father in heaven, we come before thee this evening and with gratitude in our hearts for the opportunities to learn and grow and become better people. I'm grateful for Brother Fox and his assistance in helping us learn those things that we need for this class. I ask thee to help us retain the things which we learn and to be able to help each other out. As well as from our families and help our base to help thee. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.